my panelists here are representing the federal, provincial, and municipal bodies that we work with. Our first round of speakers is going to be from the federal body of work, and Diane spoke with us earlier, so she needs no introduction. Unlike Mark, I'm going to follow the rule of no bio. However, Councillor Sohi was on this panel. I might suck up to my boss too and read his full bio. And next we're going to have Natasha Pateman, who's the Director of Policy and Innovation for Integration Foreign Credentials branch. She's joining Diane from CIC as well, and they're going to be co-presenting to you. And then we'll have Alice Wong, who's from the province, and she's the Director of Immigrant Settlement and Language Programs. And finally, Rachel will wrap us up from the AUMA. And Rachel's the Director of Policy and Advocacy for the AUMA. So without further ado, I'll have Diane and Natasha come up to join us.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and I'm very pleased to be here. As Jennifer mentioned, I am with Citizenship and Immigration, and I come from the big, bad place of Ottawa. So I am happy to be out west since I am a native BCer, and I'm getting a little closer to that direction. The presentation today, we're going to basically focus on both the national perspective, and then Diane is going to do a little more about the regional perspective. So first I'm going to talk a bit about the settlement funding cycle and some of our key integration initiatives. We divided those into 4 pillars that I'll explain in a little more detail. Then Diane's going to talk more about the settlement services in Alberta and the Northwest Territories, who's using them, what types of funding are out there, and then certainly we're always interested in finding out about outcomes and what kind of measures of success are out there. And then we're going to look a little more at the national perspective in terms of strategic approach to settlement, and then looking forward and what some of the big new initiatives are that are coming up. So in terms of the priority funding cycle, we know that we need to have a responsive cycle that's comprehensive for settlement program. As was pointed out by Fair Boards, this is a very complex field that touches many, many different layers and many different individuals at many different points in the immigration continuum. So how do we do that? Well, we're starting pre-arrival now. We're doing pre-arrival, but we're really expanding those services, and recently there was a national call for proposals for pre-arrival services. We're certainly expanding settlement programming, and we're working a little more on the integration side too, in terms of labor market being a key priority for many out there. These summits are a really great way for us to do that, especially moving forward, finding out is the settlement program sufficient, what more is needed, what kind of gaps are out there, what more is needed in funding. We always know there's never enough, so then what are the true priorities that we need to focus on? And this is a great way to gather that information. As John mentioned, we're looking for people to really come to the table to talk and to think and to give us some great ideas going forward. It also feeds into our new innovation strategy going forward, because we are looking at new ways of engaging new stakeholders. So these having webcasts is a pretty new way for the federal government to communicate with people. So these are exciting new times for us. We're also looking at Twitter and social media and things like that, which is a great way of connecting to people that we maybe haven't connected with in the past, some younger people. And we're always looking at new ways of meeting people, and employers are a really big group that we would like to be in touch with more. So these summits certainly fit into a larger priority cycle of about 3 years. We're trying to do national call for proposals, just so that everybody knows what timelines are, what the standards are, and things like that. So we're working towards those, and we are hoping to work with you to get some priorities for those. And last year's National Settlement Conference was certainly a great way to kickstart all of that. This is one of those fun diagrams that we have to do to show people that work is underway and it's always evergreen and things like that. I'm not a fan of these kinds of things, but hey, some people really like them. But it just really shows that, certainly it's always continuous, it's always being evergreen. Our focus right now is consultation. This will then lead into how we develop our priorities. That will certainly then help, like I said, there's only so much money to go around, so how are we distributing that money? And that will be done based on the priorities that you and others from the other summits come up with. And then into implementation, both pre-arrival and then current settlement programming in Canada. And then, of course, because like I said, we really want to make sure that our outcomes, what we all thought the programs would achieve, are achieving them. There's a lot of output counting. 20 people took this this language course. That's super. We're glad that 20 people did. But did 20, did they really learn from that experience, or are there things we need to do better or differently so that they do learn from that experience? So, and then we're back to consultation again, and the cycle continues. So in terms of the 4 pillars of integration, what we're doing is, of course, we've divided, again, if you break that complexity down into what are all the different pieces out there, we're focusing on welcoming societies, of course, building the bridges, the two-way street. We want newcomers to be welcome into Canada and to adapt to Canadian society. But we also know Canadian communities and Canadian employers also need to do some adaptation too. I work with many employers, and they're always asking me for, I call it the magical unicorn, that person that comes to Canada that's ready to work immediately, knows all about Canadian workplace culture, speaks 2 official languages, the list goes on. And then they say, so that way I don't have to do any training. I don't have to really, work hard on retention. And that's not what we want Canadian employers to do. We want them to really be a key partner in retention. Certainly language needs of newcomers are key. A lot of the settlement programming focus is on language, and that's because it is so important. People need to be able to function in their communities socially. They also need to be able to function in the workplace. So both social and workplace language is key. Labor market participation is very big. Certainly, as the Deputy Minister mentioned, great shortages in Alberta, and Alberta isn't the only province. So we're looking for how newcomers can get into the labor market at jobs commensurate with their skills and experience, or if they're looking for that first job in Canada, or they're a refugee that hasn't had a lot of education or a lot of work experience, there's also certainly jobs available for them. And then other core settlement services such as information sharing. Fairboy's mentioned a great piece about how people's information needs change throughout the continuum, and that's something that I'd like to look a little more at. Orientation is big. How do you welcome people in? And then, like I said, actually not just welcome them, but help them stay and feel welcomed. And then new interventions for vulnerable newcomers. And now over to Diane.
I'm a Westerner, born and raised. And I have to admit that I was born and raised in Saskatchewan. But I know. But I've lived longer in Alberta than I ever lived in Saskatchewan. So does that make me an Albertan? Okay, so that's out of the way. So over the next couple days of the summit, we're going to be viewing Alberta's and the Northwest Territories settlement programs through the lens of the 4 pillars that Natasha was just talking about. We know that Alberta continues to fuel Canada's job growth, and it will continue to do that. And of course, as a result of the bright future economically here in Alberta, and I would say even in the Northwest Territories, newcomers continue to be attracted to this province. It's forecasted that Alberta is going to have above average economic growth for the 5th straight year in 2014. And will be continuing to outperform Canada overall in terms of GDP growth. This province, as you know, is very rich in natural resources, and as Alberta's oil sands transition into production, the energy sector continues to be the key driver. And I was just talking to the Deputy Minister a little bit earlier from the province of Alberta about what the low price of oil right now is going to mean, and it's predicted that price may stay or hover around $70 for the next year or so. So what is that going to mean for Alberta? It's an interesting thought, I think, for us as we're moving forward, just thinking about settlement services and what newcomers could be coming to this province. And obviously we need to diversify beyond our natural resources. Anyway, that's my own ad lib here, sorry. Similarly for, the Northwest Territories, it's also very rich in natural resources, and as a result has the highest GDP of any jurisdiction. So, Northwest Territories is becoming ever closer to being more and more like a province as it gains more authorities all the time. And its GDP for the 2nd year in a row has grown, and its employment rate is at 69.2%, which is higher than Canada's overall rate of 62.2%. So that's certainly interesting. For us in the Western region, we're seeing growth like crazy across our north and certainly across our western provinces, primarily in Saskatchewan and Alberta. but it certainly is a driver for us as we look at settlement programming and what does that mean in these vibrant jurisdictions. So we're going to talk over the next couple slides about some of the more statistics as it relates to Alberta and to the Northwest Territories. This first one is on the Northwest Territories. I apologize in advance for the very small print on this slide. I know it's probably very difficult for you to read at the back of the room. The presentation is on the AAISA website, so you may want to pull it from there. I think it's still the unrevised version on the website, but I'm sure AAISA will update that so that you will have an up-to-date slide presentation that you can refer back to at your leisure. So starting with the Northwest Territories, I know that all of you, who work there with the immigrants, that you're seeing a lot of trends and client needs firsthand. The information that we get from iCare has certainly been very, very important for us. It's still a new system. We're still working through it, but certainly we're getting information that we've never had before, which is very important for us. What it looks, though, certainly with the analysis that we're able to provide, that what's going on in the Northwest Territories is not unique to other jurisdictions or provinces. It's very similar in comparative data across the board on what we're seeing. We have seen an increase in the number of permanent residents in the territory between 2005 and 2013, albeit the numbers are very small. It's still a growing permanent resident population from 84 to 150. I know that doesn't sound big, but I think the population, the total population of Northwest Territories, correct me, my colleagues over in the corner if I'm wrong, but I think it's about 35,000. Is that correct? 40,000. I was off by 5. There you go. Thanks. So nevertheless, it is an important piece and trend for the Northwest Territories. More than 55% come from the economic class, which is also an important thing. And the slide also shows the usage rates of certain services by clients. One of the things that's really important and is certainly a preoccupation of mine, and this is not in my notes, so I'm ad-libbing again here, but is the whole issue of secondary migration. And it came to light for me as it relates to the Northwest Territories recently as well. So tomorrow in Yellowknife, my colleagues will be participating in hosting a citizenship ceremony. And there will be 141 new citizens that'll be granted citizenship tomorrow. We normally have about one ceremony a year in the Northwest Territories in Yellowknife. Our most recent one was in February, where I think we had about 77, or maybe 50 and 77 the year before, something like that. But the increase to 141 suddenly is quite remarkable, and it certainly poses the question to me, there's likely a lot of secondary migration in there, and it's a number that we haven't been able to quantify very well so far. So moving on to Alberta, and I'll put my plug in here. I spoke with Christina Beale earlier, had breakfast with her this morning, in fact, and she's the executive director of ILVARC, as you know. And Christina has been collecting some data as well for her organization, just to understand what her client group looks like. And she has some data on secondary migration that's pretty interesting from a Calgary perspective. And Stephen Mill, one of my colleagues in CIC from Edmonton, is working on some data for me on the refugee population as it relates to secondary migration as well. All that to say, if any of you in your service organizations have statistics or demographics of secondary migration, sorry, Stephen, send it to Stephen Mill, because we're doing a little bit of a study here on this. And we really would like to understand what the secondary migration data is, because it's very important as we look forward to what our settlement programming should be in this province, because we know there is a significant secondary migration component, and we have to think about that as we're looking at our funding. So that's my own little plug there. So moving on to Alberta, you can see, of course, that there's been a substantial increase in the net allocation for settlement services in Alberta over the last 5 years, and we're now at almost 85 million, I believe. So 86 million. So it's way up there in Alberta, considering we started at what? I can't even read the slide. 16 million 5 years ago. So wow, what a terrific increase. And of course, with that, the programming has certainly increased as well, as has the access to services. We're getting more and more uptake. And that's what that graph at the bottom there will show. So nearly 40,000 clients are accessing at least one settlement service in the fiscal year 2012-13. Moving on to the next slide, and good thing you're clicking, or somebody's clicking.
Oh, sorry, I
because-
think I clicked one too many.
Oh,
Alberta.
there's
you want
Alberta.
this?
Okay, that's the one I was speaking to.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
next
nice.
one. There you go.
Permanent.
So permanent residents by category. This is an interesting statistic as well, because the majority, 62%, are part of the economic class, and that includes provincial nominees. So we have a high economic component here in the province, which is certainly not surprising given the economy here, but also that the number of permanent residents has been increasing. So again, we've almost doubled the number of permanent residents coming to Alberta since 2005. So from 19,000 to over 36,000 and growing, because I've seen some of the numbers more recently, and the upward trend continues to climb. And of course, Stats Canada continues to project that increase moving forward into future years. So, sorry, we're not doing very well on the clicking here, are we? So on the usage of settlement services, of course, this slide shows the usage rates. You'll note that the data presented is from 2012-13 on the left-hand table. It's because of the transition to iCare, we haven't got data to produce for 13-14, unfortunately. Nevertheless, we can confirm that there were 260,000 permanent residents access at least one settlement services across Canada, outside of Quebec and British Columbia. And of course, as I said before, 62% of Alberta's total permanent resident population is of the economic immigrant group. And 52% of our unique clients who access services, who access at least one settlement service, are the economic group as well. So some of these slides, I apologize, are very dense, and I realize it's very hard for you to see. But certainly some of this information that we're providing is also from the annual project performance reports that settlement organizations provide to us. That is more, if I could say, narrative type of data as opposed to quantitative data, but tells us what's going on with their particular organizations in the world of settlement. So we received from Alberta 538 APPRs for 13-14 that represented 529 contribution agreements from service provider organizations across the country. But though I don't have a slide for the Northwest Territories, because as you can appreciate, the numbers are very, very small, I think you can extrapolate the same findings for the Northwest Territories as what we find in Alberta. Most projects provided multiple components of the settlement program. Community connection services were the most frequently provided program component in Alberta and was included in almost 65% of the projects. Yeah, and I'll just move on to the next slide. So the resources for projects, and this is a very interesting statistic and really forms, in my mind, certainly the impetus for this kind of a forum today for people from various areas to exchange ideas. 95% of our projects include partnerships, and they could be partnerships at various levels of government, but also with the private sector. So that's an important statistic for sure. And going back to my earlier remarks, it does take a community to integrate a newcomer. So these partnerships are really important, and certainly important to have stakeholders outside of settlement organizations here with us today, to be able to have today and tomorrow, to be able to have that discourse about how the communities can partner and make a difference for our newcomers. So enabling factors and promising practices. Based on our analysis, we heard from service providers that the most common factors, enablers, and promising practices include leveraging partnerships, as I said, raising awareness of service availability, providing targeted training opportunities for clients, hiring and retaining well-trained multilingual staff, delivering holistic and blended services to clients to correspond to identified demands, and reaching multi-barriered populations by providing classes based on these peer groups or through home visits. On the client needs side, again, you found that the needs of newcomers in Alberta tend to be fairly similar to those of other provinces and territories. One notable difference in Alberta is the impact of a strong labor market on costs of living and secondary migration, as I mentioned before, from other provinces. So this is an important piece for us. And of course, the needs include workplace-specific language classes, job search assistance, access to employment counseling, assistance with transportation, access to affordable housing, which is getting, I would say, ever more acute in our large centers like Calgary and Edmonton, and employment services tailored to youth. So with that, I'll turn it back to Natasha, now that I've, bungled your head up with numbers, and she can get back to policy.
Thanks, Diane. In the past, we certainly had a patchwork approach. There was no consistent approach to priority setting across the country, and so we didn't differentiate between really. Well, there was the regional pieces. There was certainly Manitoba and BC had their own priorities, things like that. So we've tried to move away from that because there was some disconnection, and it didn't mean always there was efficient programming or that there was economies of scale that we could really use. So now our focus is definitely stronger partnerships, information gathering such as these summits, and always looking at ways we can continuously improve the programming. And one of the ways that I'd say has been really successful is investing in community partnerships such as the local immigrant partnerships, the Réseau Immigration Francophone, and the Immigrant Employment Council. So those have been great models that we'd like to replicate more across the country. As I mentioned, we're trying to move to 3-year cycles for CFPs, so everybody knows when they're coming and can adequately prepare rather than being caught at the last minute to do a great big proposal. We're also trying to aim for nationally comparable services with some regionally specific interventions or components. We're certainly well aware that different regions do have different needs and do have very specific needs, so we're trying to work those within the national comparable services. And then we're looking at how we can certainly deepen collaboration with our federal and provincial our other federal partners as well as provincial and municipal partners in order to implement some of these pieces. So in terms of current priorities, as I mentioned, the 2012 objective in the national call for proposals was really to try and start establishing comparable services across Canada. We wanted to make sure that all newcomers had access to Welcome to Canada. They had the Living in Canada tool. Tutela has been very, very successful as well. The other one that has really been growing by leaps and bounds is Job Search and other supports to do with labor market integration. And then childcare for newcomer children has also been, or just care for newcomer children has been a big piece. And the settlement sector and broader community, as I mentioned, are really supported by the local immigrant partnerships and the RIFs. And we are also looking and working with the settlement sector on how we can do training for the settlement sector and how there can be continuous engagement with all settlement sector employees. Okay. So just focusing on the future, like I said, we're looking at collaborative approaches. We want we want to further engage the partners we already have. We're looking for new partners, and we also really want, as the federal government is to engage stakeholders early and often. We're certainly working with the Federal Provincial Territorial Settlement Working Group, where we know employment, FQR, foreign qualification, and foreign credential recognition are important, language for the workforce, and social connections. In terms of the innovation agenda, which has been part of my focus, we're looking at new ways of delivering services such as virtual career fairs, and we're also focusing on alternative careers, and I'll be happy to chat more about that afterwards. And certainly there's a labor market focus. We want to help, as I mentioned, employers not only recruit people, but help them retain employees. And we want, beginning overseas, to help people become socially and economically integrated faster. And we want to reach more people pre-arrival so that they know what to expect once coming to Canada.
We're looking at your input. We can't stress that enough. And that's all of you who are participating from service provider organizations, community organizations, institutions, etc. We're also interested in the specific needs of certain particular groups, including the Francophone communities. And we're looking forward to finding out and seeing the outcomes of this summit. There will be a report put together by AAISA and by CIC, working together, I think, on what this report will look like. And that will feed into certainly the national priorities. So thanks very much in advance for your participation.